Everyone grows up learning about George Washington's apple tree and Benjamin Franklin's kite and the key experiment. It turns out that a lot of the things everyone knows about our founding fathers are either slightly or completely wrong, and the things most people don't know are actually terrifying. There are a lot of strange and shocking details about the founding fathers that were probably left out of your history textbooks on purpose. Who were the founding fathers? They were some of the most influential people in American history, and almost all of them were way more drunk and morally questionable than most people can remember. And while we often look back at the American Revolution through rose-colored glasses, the truth is that these men weren't always so noble. It's not easy creating a nation from scratch, and nothing proves it quite like the dark American history surrounding these founding fathers. The phrase, "skeletons in the closet," takes on a very literal meaning when used in reference to Benjamin Franklin. In 1998, renovators working on Franklin's London home uncovered 1,200 pieces of human bone. The pieces came from different parts of the body and from about 15 specimens, 6 of whom were children. While on the surface it appears Ben Franklin started off as the original Jack the Ripper, experts say it's far more likely the founding father assisted an underground anatomy school by helping sneak bodies from the graveyard and gallows. Back in the day, studying bodies was considered morally reprehensible, and early pioneers in the field often had to acquire them in secret to do their studies. Many founding fathers finished their lives poor, ill, and/or in any number of tragic ways. But few passed on as awfully as New York Senator Gouverneur Morris. During his life, Morris helped draft the preamble of the Constitution and walked on a peg leg. Rumor says he got this peg leg by leaping out of the bedroom window of a married woman he was sleeping with to avoid her angry husband. Morris perished in 1816 at the age of 64 after trying to cure a urinary tract blockage. George Washington, who inherited ownership of his first enslaved people at the age of 10, used legal loopholes to keep people enslaved throughout his life, even as abolition took hold throughout the North. While living in Philadelphia, he found a way to get around the Gradual Abolition Act of 1780, which stated any enslaved person who lived in the state of Pennsylvania for more than 6 months was free. Washington would secretly send enslaved people on trips outside state borders every 6 months to constantly reset the clock and ensure they would not be legally free. A modern-day American averages about 2 gallons of alcohol per year. Back then, your average colonist guzzled 7 gallons per year and was a few beers into the day by lunch. A number of theories attempt to explain the founding fathers' extreme proclivity for alcohol, other than the fact that starting a country is stressful business. These theories range from the scarcity of clean water to a widespread belief that water was bad for you to the idea that only poor people drank water. Back in the day, beer and cider were also not considered alcohol, and no one stopped them, because what timing is worse for an intervention than a freaking revolution? As the oldest signer of the Declaration of Independence, 65-year-old Honest John Hart faced especially terrible consequences for his patriotism. In 1776, he began to lose everything. Within months of signing the Declaration, his wife of 36 years passed, while British forces forced him and his 13 children from their New Jersey home. He sent the youngest children to live with neighbors. According to legend, Hart spent a long time hiding from the British by living in caves, open fields, and the forest. As this elderly man toiled in the elements, the British looted his property, slew all of his livestock, and partially destroyed his home. In the summer of 1793, yellow fever swept the city of Philadelphia, taking out thousands of people. Though the city's doctors ranked among the best in the world, they lacked the knowledge of how to treat the disease or prevent its contraction. Signer of the Declaration of Independence, Dr. Benjamin Rush, among the most respected medical pioneers of his day, believed purging the body through bloodletting and forced vomiting would cure patients. As it turns out, these fluid-based treatments failed to help patients. If anything, they likely made their situations worse. His peers harshly criticized his efforts, and to this day, historians still debate whether or not he qualifies as a hero or villain of Philadelphia history. Despite a large community of physicians openly critiquing his practices, Dr. Rush wouldn't stop bleeding his sick patients and forcing them to vomit. Thomas Paine, the founding father, famous for his pamphlet Common Sense, passed in 1809. Less than 10 people attended the funeral of the once famous Paine, who lost popularity for opposing the church. Next to broke at the end of his life, Paine was buried in a modest grave on his farm with all his burial requests ignored. 10 years later, William Cobbett dug up Paine's remains to take him back to London for a more respectful burial. But this bit of grave robbing backfired. Paine's remains ended up being passed down to Cobbett's relatives, who sold them off piece by piece. While devotees of Paine routinely attempt to give him a proper burial in New York, finding all of the pieces of his body remains an impossible task. Today, they say Paine's head lies in Australia, and the rest of his body is at the four corners of the world. President John Adams came into office having to fill some big shoes. The shadow of George Washington, popular and beloved across the country, made adapting to the White House even harder for the way less charming Adams. His political ideas did him in from the very beginning. As vice president under George Washington, he suggested the president should be referred to as His Highness, the President of the United States of America and protector of the rights of the same. Certainly an interesting title choice for the leader of a country that actively resisted monarchy. Furthermore, John Adams remains one of the few presidents to only serve one term. His administration created some of the least popular legislation of all time, including the Alien and Sedition Acts that made criticizing the government illegal. Needless to say, a whole country of people who just escaped one egotistical monarch felt little love for someone who fashioned himself as the same. Judge George Wythe, signer of the Declaration of Independence, ended his life ignominiously, poisoned by his own grandnephew after threatening to cut him out of his will. Minutes after, a person Wythe had enslaved poured coffee for herself. Wythe and his 16-year-old protege, Michael Brown, they all developed horrifying stomach pains. Wythe passed within days. Though the enslaved person, Lydia Broadnax, claimed she saw his grandnephew throw a piece of paper into the coffee pot before serving it, Virginia law prevented black people from testifying against white people in court, so he was ultimately acquitted. Though the relationship of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings is well known, history largely romanticizes what was undoubtedly a messed-up situation. After the passing of his wife, Thomas Jefferson began a decades-long affair with his wife's half-sister, Sally Hemings, the daughter of his father-in-law and one of the enslaved people he owned. Jefferson began this relationship with Hemings when she was a teenager, and legally his property. At the time, he was in his 40s. He and Sally Hemings had 6 children together, and Jefferson saw that all of them were raised as slaves. Despite how obviously wrong this was, there have been countless depictions of their relationship over the years, including an opera. A controversial novel even came out in 2016 that packaged this relationship as a romance. A lot of people, understandably, weren't happy about it. George Washington stands as one of the most famous and recognizable American figures, but few realize the issues he faced regarding his dental health. As Washington grew older, all of his dental issues actually began to change the shape of his face. While he did in fact have dentures, they were not made of wood like most believe, but different combinations of lead, brass, gold, ivory, wire, screws, and even the teeth of Black Americans. Deep in one of Washington's account books is an entry that shows him buying 9 teeth from them for 122 shillings. By signing the Declaration of Independence, the Founding Fathers risked their lives, and for many, this risk failed to pay off. In fact, this risk cost New Jersey signer and Continental Congress member Richard Stockton everything. While he succeeded in moving his family to safety, he was captured when the British invaded New Jersey. The British imprisoned Stockton for years in terrible conditions before moving him to Provost Prison in New York. At Provost, he starved and was forced to endure freezing winter temperatures for over a month. This ruined Stockton's health, and when he was finally released on parole, he returned to find his estate ransacked and his library, one of the nation's finest, burned. While conflicting accounts exist about whether George Washington was a particularly sadistic or kind slave owner, most historical accounts show he frequently utilized harsh punishments against the people he enslaved. Though corporal punishment of enslaved people through whippings, beatings, and overworking was common throughout the South, records show Washington utilized especially terrible punishments. Thanks for watching, guys, and don't forget to subscribe our channel.